All right, I'm Joshua Lisec, the Ghostwriter. I am here with my man Elias, the author of Memorable, Profitable, Virtual. Elias, how's it going today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Joshua?
Pretty dandy, pretty dandy. So a title like Memorable, Profitable, Virtual. Where do you come up with a title like that to talk about virtual events?
I came up with that title because as we were working through the book process, you had asked me what's the number one reason that people are going to buy this book and finish reading it. And they're going to be motivated to pay for this with their time and their money. And what I had answered was to make memorable, profitable events. That's the
And
central thesis of everything that I do. Is like you're running an event, it's got to be memorable and it's got to be profitable, either short term or long term.
it's funny how when you think about the most important outcomes from the book, often those outcomes ought to be in the title itself. So a book like Memorable, Profitable, Virtual, can you tell us a little bit about who this book is for that wants memorable, profitable virtual events as the experience?
Sure. So anyone who is sweating over what kind of events do we need to run? So, for example, as either a business owner or as a brand owner or as a marketing professional, you know that you need to be doing events and you've got some marketing dollars that you can throw at events, but you're not quite sure. Do we go back to doing things in person because that's the way we've always done it? And we're back to business as usual, baby, except for inflation and everything else that's rearing its head. So you've got your events and marketing portfolio. You're not sure where to allocate that money. What I'm trying to show you in this book is here is a way where instead of throwing money at traditional venues and traditional means of doing event marketing, you can create experiences. You can create an audience for yourself that you own, that you're able to tap into, that you're able to chat with on a regular basis, that you're able to test out new ideas on. And instead of waiting 365 days between events, which is a long time in today's world, it's huge. I mean, 3 years ago, AI wasn't on anybody's radar, and now my father uses ChatGPT to write his emails. That's how fast the world changes. A once a year event just isn't going to cut it anymore in terms of talking with your audience. So I wanted to show you here's a way where you can talk with your audience on a regular basis. You can deliver them compelling content. Here's what will get them to stay in their seats. Here's what will get them to trust you and eventually to partner up or to buy from you or to be your client.
And that is exactly what the book does, in fact, cover. It's the different types of events, virtual and hybrid events that businesses and organizations can run, the purpose of them, how to measure the success of them, which I like about this book is you can actually run the numbers, do the math on the return on investment that you could expect from this event. And then given that, what should your budget be? And then what should you spend that budget on, right? The sorts of deep topics that you probably won't find on Google. And that's one of the things I advise all the authors that I work with is to include ungoogleable and now unchat GPTable information in your book. And you do that because you have years upon years running virtual events, like before, long before anybody was, oh, a virtual event, open Zoom, long before that was a thing. You were running virtual events, you were running hybrid events, and you were pulling them off professionally. And so you know what works, what doesn't work, how to fix that, and I make everything else work for what exactly is a memorable virtual event, which is difficult to pull off, and a memorable profitable virtual event. So there's a lot going on here in this book, but it's not the first book that's been written on virtual events. How do you, in your mind and in readers' minds, differentiate this book from if I go to Amazon.ca and search virtual events? How is yours different from everything else I'm going to see?
So a lot of the other books on the market will go deep into a particular topic. For example, they'll talk about producing an event on Zoom, or they'll talk about producing an event on Skype, or they'll focus on the very nitty-gritty production details, which are still important. I don't want to gloss over the idea that production is not important. It is. What I found a lot of the other books on the market did was either they got way too far into the weeds, which is we haven't even answered the question, do you need to host a virtual event? Do you need to host an in-person event? Do you need to host a hybrid event? And then the other issue was a lot of them talk to other people in the industry. So they used a lot of industry specific lingo. We talk about preview and program feeds. We talk about talkback microphones. We talk about, having your production feed in the headset. And this is far more detailed and far more granular, not targeted towards, again, the marketing professional or the brand owner who's in the business world figuring out, you know what, I don't care if you're using a Sennheiser MKH 416 or you're using your iPhone microphone. I need to talk to my audience. How do I do that? The technology is important, but that is implementation details. And again, that's something that my team is fantastic at handling, but that's implementation details. We're talking about, before we even talk about any of the technology, we need to figure out what kind of event or events are right for you and right for your brand. And that's what I wanted to capture with the book. Before you hold an event, before you start spending money, before you book a venue, before you book your speakers, before you do anything else, here's what you need to know.
That's well said, because so many books will often either just focus on the why of something, and they won't really cover much of the what or the how, because it's all about the sales pitch. And then it turns out the book is the top of the funnel for their other products and services. And that's okay to do. But if you have just, here's why you should do this, and then 150 pages later, you haven't actually told them what to do, that's a problem. On the other hand, if you have a highly technical book, you're going to lose a lot of people. And it seems like not just in your niche, but in a multitude of niches in nonfiction books, those mistakes are made. So you wanted to walk the line of giving people enough context for not just why, but which types of events to run. How do you know which one is the right event to run? And then how do you get people to show up? And how do you get people to maximize their time attending it, watching it, and make sure that they remember it? And then how do you repurpose the content to monetize it? Even again, how do you maximize the number of people who book for next year's event or next quarter's event? All of this stuff. It's kind of like an events business in a book is one way to think about this. Even if you're not in the business of events and you just have done like a hybrid event, or you've done a couple of virtual calls like once a quarter, once a month, or something like that. But this is a great way to get everything you can out of all the virtual events you're probably going to hold anyway. And if you weren't going to hold them, then you realize, oh, you're missing out on incredible, relatively low cost opportunities. And I say relatively low cost because as you help people run the numbers in this book and they can calculate their return on investment, in many ways, running a virtual event with high production value doesn't necessarily need to break the bank like a trade show might, or other in-person events that, while it's in person, we're meeting people in meet space, they call it. In terms of the results you get the same or less than you would from a virtual event, which cost 20% of what your trade show budget was. You're kind of doing a lot of the pitching your book for you here, Elias, but did I miss anything?
I love that trade show analogy and figuring out like how much should you be spending on a virtual event and how much does it cost to put these on? Because here's the thing, this is a big topic I'm talking with a lot of brands about these days, is the average price to go and exhibit at a trade show. You could spend around $40,000 to $50,000. $40,000 to $50,000. You could take 10% of that, build yourself a beautiful studio, and I'm talking beautiful. That's $4,000 to $5,000 would cover everything you need to. Now you have a setup where you can host webinars whenever you want, which is the type of virtual event. You can host conferences whenever you want. We're seeing big brands like ClickUp and Canva. They are hosting their own virtual conferences to debut new ways to use their product, to debut new ways to be more productive with their product. They figured out we can use virtual events to own our audience. They're still doing webinars on a regular basis. The brands that are progressive and understand the power of virtual are investing now. And that's the thing, is a lot of the virtual setup, it's a one-time investment, especially if you're deciding to set up your own studio. A lot of companies balk at the idea of, oh, studio, ooh, I'm not so sure. Spend 4,000 to 5,000 now to set up a nice studio. You now have a space where you can do unlimited content creation, not just for virtual events, but for your social media. And of course, if you're producing content for virtual events and you're recording it, and if you're not recording it, you're missing out. You should record everything. If you're recording it, well, everybody always needs more stuff for social media, right? So that's where you can capitalize it on as well. Repurpose that content that you've recorded for social media, get it out there, turn it into the sizzle reel for next year's event. Virtual events, in-person events are getting more and more expensive. And if you want to do an in-person event, that's fine. What I caution people around now is in-person is the premium experience. The bar to attending an in-person event is so much higher. In our 2023 stats, what we saw across the board with all our clients is the majority of the ticket sales happened within, say, 2 to 3 weeks of the event starting for their in-person. Their virtual ticket sales were consistent throughout the whole selling period. And this is something that another event expert and the author of the foreword to this book, Julia Solaris, says is the in-person is the premium experience. And so if you're just going back to doing things the way that you've always done and just hosting an in-person event, that can be a great way to spend a lot of money and see not a lot of return for it. You might have been able to get away with that in 2023 to ride on the wave of nostalgia for pre-2020 events. But I don't think it's going to fly in 2024, and you're not going to see the effects of that until 2025. And we're already starting to see that with some of the conference feedback that we got. Many virtual attendees had a better experience than the in-person attendees in 2023. Once you strip away all the niceties and all the pretending to ourselves that it's great to hug each other again. It's so good to hug. Even though if you met on the street, you probably never would hug. But that's just me.
Yes, and another thing about a virtual events is that you increase your total addressable market, right?
Yeah.
Because there's only a certain type of person that is able to schedule time away to go to a literal physical event. Now, having been to literal physical events myself, I've noticed that there tend to be two types of people who go to the events. It seems to be like the bottom 10% and the top 10% is who can find time to get away. One, because they're underemployed, and the other because they're unemployable and they have complete control over their schedule. And both of those have very different price points that they're used to purchasing. So if you go like a mid-range, like, okay, it's a few $1,000s for this event, for example, that's going to price out that bottom 10% who have plenty of time on their hands to come to your physical event from even states or countries away. On the other hand, if it's only a couple $1,000s, well, it's not really going to be worth the time because the perception of value is not there. You would have been better off charging $50,000 or $75,000 or more to come to your in-person event for 2 or 3 days, right? So there's when you realize that middle 80% can do the couple $1,000s or even a few $100s for a virtual conference, let's say virtual event, where there's a schedule and there's breakout rooms like you talk about in the book, and there's before and there's after, and there's assignment of you to the sorts of people that you need to meet. You don't have to rely on serendipity and luck anymore to make those acquaintances with people that you would not have made acquaintances with most likely because of all of the happy hour chaos and the people are half drunk and then there's food over there and everyone's focusing on that, and you're not actually able to make those high value connections. But because everything is virtual and it's digitized, it's data based. And so what that means is now you're able to ensure everyone gets maximum value from the virtual event in a way that was not possible with a physical event because you're so focused on spending all your money on catering and lights and the space and all this other crap.
Sure.
That's part of it.
Sure. Not just that, but think about it this way. And we talk about this in the book. The idea of the conference or the trade show, the traditional in-person conference and trade show, that dates back a long time. I think it was our research showed it was the 1800s or 1900s. Like they've existed for a long time. And before the advent of tools like Zoom and Skype and Teams and Slack and everything else, remember the days of the 1990s where you had to pay for long distance?
Yeah.
Like, you know, you were doing 10, 10, 220, and it was 95 cents for the first 3 minutes and then 48 cents for the remainder of the call for long distance. Like there was a period in time where that trade show or that in-person conference was your one opportunity to meet with somebody, meet with your customers, meet with your prospects on the other side of the country. You're East Coast based, you want to go meet your West Coast clients, that trade show or conference might be your one time of the year. Now, I mean, look at us right now. We're able to hop on a Zoom call, record this, put this out to the web. Anybody can access it at almost zero cost. The cost of an internet connection, you get everything. So again, it's the whole idea of we need to gather everybody under one roof to consume the content and network and party and just feels a little bit dated. That's not to say it doesn't have a place. I think the way that events are evolving is virtual is going to become the hub where we're consuming the content. But there's so much opportunity for event organizers to say, you know what? The in-person component has, you know, if we create these beautiful networking pods that are in person, that are hyper local, I'm talking about you know, we're organizing a watch party here in London, Ontario, and then we're going to organize a watch party in Columbus, Ohio, and you get to network with people in those small pods, and then online becomes your larger, becomes the hub around which all of the content revolves. You can take advantage of both mediums, both the virtual and the in-person mediums. So the way that we're going to hold events is evolving. Plus, we have an entire generation that, thanks to 2020 to 2023, spent their formative professional years 100% online. In the middle of 2020, when we hired, in the midst of everything going on, I cut my salary to zero, took out some loans, and hired some co-op students. That was some of their first co-op experiences were online. Like it was for some of them, it was their first ever professional job doing marketing. And it was 100% virtual. It's 100% online. And it's the same story with a lot of students from that period. Their formative experiences in the professional world are online first, are virtual. They don't blink an eye at hopping on a Zoom call or going to a virtual conference. And that's the demographic that leadership needs to start thinking about, because those, you know, what are they, Gen Z? You know, it's like they're not just teenagers anymore. They're starting to enter the workforce. And the average age, if you take a look around, a lot of the traditional in-person events, no offense, I'm the youngest there usually by miles. You know, the ages are, you know, I'm not seeing a lot of, for some of the events that I've been to, I'm not seeing kind of a lot of younger talent replacing the older talent that may be aging out or retiring from their industries. The younger people just are not networking at these events. And it's either because they don't see the value in spending $2,000 early in their career, or they realize, you know what, if I do 30 minutes of intentional social media, I can be 10x ahead of being at this conference. And so virtual gives you that best of both worlds. You can do that intentional social media, you can consume some awesome content, and you can see, is this a organization that I want to be around? Does this serve my interests, and can I be helpful to them?
That's right. That's right. And speaking of helpful, one of the things that you saw as essential for the journey of this book was getting help, right? People know me as the ghostwriter, and you do too. So can you tell me a little bit about why you wanted to get a professional ghostwriter's help with this book, not just to write it, but to get it published?
Sure. I have experience writing books. My first book was called Beyond Passwords. I wrote it myself. In retrospect, I realized that it should have remained the series of blog posts that it originally started out as. I didn't know how to format it. I didn't know how to do cover design. I had no idea how to do any kind of the marketing. I didn't know what made a good outline. It really was just a bunch of blog posts sandwiched together and put out there. And to be fair, it showed. So when it came to writing a book about virtual events, I thought I want to become recognized as an expert, not necessarily in the event industry, but as a trusted advisor to brands and companies and creators who want to build up a portfolio of events, or they're thinking about doing events, but they're not sure how. And so I thought, well, I could either spend the time and effort to write this myself, or just like I have an accountant to do my taxes for me, and just like I have a lawyer to represent my legal interests, and just like I have a doctor to do, the yearly examination on certain places, I have a ghostwriter who can take the stories and dig in. Because here's something that I realized as we went through the writing process. It wasn't just the outline that was helpful. Having a ghostwriter allows you to back away from your subject area, because chances are there are ideas that you have forgotten. They're just muscle memory at this point, that are novel and brand new to your audience. And they need to hear that. That's the sort of stuff that your audience needs to hear. Again, I go back to the microphone example, because you can go on any forum and go, well, what's the best lapel microphone for a conference? And you'll get a spectrum of answers. That is so far in the details that if I had written it myself, I would have probably been giving recommendations about, you want to use a service that uses web RTC instead of HLS live streaming. You as a brand professional, you in the C-suite, you don't care about those details. What you care about is, how do we get in touch with our audience? How do we host events that are worth our time and money investment? That's what I wanted to get across. And that's what a ghostwriter can do for you. They come in, they help you pick apart your stories. They figure out what needs to go into the book, what doesn't need to go in, what is extra fluff, what doesn't make sense. And they help you structure your knowledge in a way that is accessible to your ideal client profile, your ideal customer profile, in a way that you would not be able to yourself, because you're just too close.
I appreciate all that insight. Now, can you tell us a little bit about what the experience going from a Word document, basically, to an actual published book available internationally, in your country, my country, elsewhere? What was that experience like, of actually having not just a book, but a real book?
A real book with a real title and a real cover and dust jackets and all this stuff that I didn't need to design myself. And that was the fact that so much of the administrivia was just taken care of. All the accounts were set up for me. The cover design, just being able to get a number of cover designs and iterate over a number of weeks on, here's what looks good, and sending those out to the alpha testers to say, what do you think about these designs? What speaks to you? What doesn't? The cover design ended up being crowdsourced, because I had about 20 people that I would send covers to. And the cover that we picked was the one that it was so funny, because everybody's number 2 and number 3 top choices would change, but the number 1 was the cover that we went with every single time, like across the board. And I had somebody say to me, that screams bestseller. They didn't know why. They said it just screams bestseller. So just having all of that administrative stuff taken care of, so that in the background, because I've still got my day-to-day business, right? If you're doing all of that yourself, and again, I come from having done this myself, you will spend days upon days figuring out, how do I get an ISBN number? How do I get an ISBN number in Canada and the United States? Oh, I need an ISBN for the ebook. I need one for the hardcover. I need one for the soft cover. How do we get the soft covers printed up? How do we format the EPUB? there's 1,000 little details that in and of themselves don't sound like a big deal, but you add them up. And if you're a professional that's charging hundreds, even thousands of dollars per hour, like any one of those tasks it becomes worthless for you to do yourself. And you're not an expert at it. Again, Lisec and his team, you're not just working with Joshua, you're working with Joshua and his team that know what they're doing. They've been down this road of designing international bestsellers. So chances are, again, you're an expert in your field. Lisec and his team are an expert in theirs. Let the experts do their thing.
Let the experts do their thing, not just with ghostwriting and the publishing of books, but also with events. And one of the best ways to learn how a proper virtual event ought to be done, including the one that you all might be doing now or have scheduled, it's not too late to make it all that it could have been. So get yourself memorable, profitable virtual available on Amazon and everywhere else that fine books are sold on the internets. Elias, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing.
Thank you for having me. It was a blast.
Sure thing.